What if I told you that a single day of eating almost nothing could trigger a chain reaction that slowly forces your body to consume itself? Not in some movie, not in a survival show, in real life. And the most disturbing part? Millions of people on Earth don't choose this. They live it every day. Today we're going to find out exactly how little food a human can survive on, what happens inside the body when calories almost disappear, and why surviving on the absolute minimum comes at a price most people never see. This is the mystery of science. If you're fascinated by the hidden science behind everyday life, subscribe now, because what happens next inside the human body is far more shocking than most people realize. For some people, food is just fuel. For others, it's one of life's greatest pleasures. But imagine waking up tomorrow knowing that from now on, you could only eat the bare minimum needed to stay alive. How little could that actually be? Could you survive on 1 egg a day, a small bowl of rice, a few pieces of fruit? Or does the body have some secret survival mode that allows it to stretch tiny amounts of food far beyond what seems possible? The answer is both fascinating and unsettling. The human body is one of the most adaptable systems ever created. When food is abundant, it spends energy freely. When food becomes scarce, it begins making sacrifices. Think of it like your phone switching into extreme battery-saving mode. Your body lowers energy consumption, reduces non-essential functions, and starts carefully rationing every available resource. Scientists call this metabolic adaptation. It's one of the reasons humans can survive for surprisingly long periods with very little food. But adaptation is not the same thing as safety. And that's a distinction that becomes very important as this story unfolds. Before we continue, I want to know something. If you could only eat one food for an entire month, what would it be? Let me know in the comments. By the end of this video, you might completely change your answer. So what is the minimum amount of food needed to avoid death? A typical adult often requires somewhere around 2,000 to 2,500 calories per day to maintain normal bodily functions and activity levels. But survival is different from thriving. In highly controlled situations with minimal movement, humans have survived on dramatically lower calorie intake for limited periods. The body can temporarily function on a tiny fraction of its usual energy needs because it begins consuming stored fuel. At first, that sounds impressive, until you see what happens next. The process starts almost immediately. During the first few days, your body relies on stored glucose. This fuel is packed away in the liver and muscles as glycogen. It's easy to access and provides quick energy. The problem? The supply is limited, very limited. Within a short time, those reserves begin running low. This is usually when hunger becomes intense. You may feel irritable, you may develop headaches, concentration becomes more difficult, some people experience dizziness or fatigue. At this point, you're still functioning relatively normally, but the body has already started preparing for a much harsher reality. And that's where things get interesting. Around several days into severe calorie restriction, the body enters a new phase. Glucose is no longer available in sufficient quantities. A backup plan takes over. Fat becomes the primary source of fuel. Stored fat begins breaking down in a process known as lipolysis. As this happens, the liver produces compounds called ketone bodies. If you've heard of ketogenic diets, this is the same basic mechanism. For many people, appetite begins to decrease somewhat during this phase. Breath may develop a strange odor. Energy levels often change. Some people report mental clarity. Others feel sluggish and weak. Meanwhile, the body's metabolism starts slowing down. Heart rate may decrease, body temperature can drop slightly. The goal is simple: use less energy, last longer, survive. But even this strategy has limits, because eventually, fat alone isn't enough. And when that moment arrives, the body starts making decisions that become increasingly dangerous. After enough time with severe food restriction, muscle tissue becomes a valuable source of raw materials. The body begins breaking down muscle proteins, and that includes much more than the muscles you see in the mirror. Your body doesn't care whether a protein comes from your arms, your legs, or somewhere else. Protein is protein. The result is gradual loss of strength, reduced physical performance, slower reflexes, difficulty concentrating, and increasing vulnerability. Women may experience disruptions in reproductive function. Immune defenses weaken. Recovery becomes slower. The body is no longer simply conserving energy, It is actively dismantling parts of itself to keep essential systems running. This is where survival starts becoming extremely expensive. And what happens next may surprise you. One of the most famous studies ever conducted on starvation revealed just how powerful food deprivation can be. During the Minnesota Starvation Experiment in the 1940s, healthy men underwent prolonged semi-starvation under controlled conditions. The results were dramatic. Participants developed severe fatigue, depression became common, anxiety increased, many became obsessed with food. They talked about it constantly, dreamed about it, collected recipes, read cookbooks, thought about meals almost non-stop. What's remarkable is that these effects weren't simply physical, they were psychological. Food restriction changed the way people thought, the way they felt, and in some cases, those effects lasted long after the experiment ended. That's important because when people think about hunger, they often imagine an empty stomach, but hunger also affects the brain, the mind, the personality, the very way a person experiences the world. And that brings us to a controversial question that has been debated for decades. Could generations of food scarcity shape how populations store energy? One idea, known as the thrifty gene hypothesis, suggested that certain groups may have inherited traits that favored efficient fat storage because their ancestors survived repeated periods of famine. The theory gained attention and sparked significant discussion. However, modern research has raised serious questions about this explanation. Scientists have not identified a single fat gene responsible for obesity. Instead, body weight appears to be influenced by a complex combination of factors. Genetics plays a role, but so do education, chronic stress, access to nutritious foods, socioeconomic conditions, sleep quality, environment, and many other influences. Human biology is rarely explained by one simple answer, and that's exactly what makes it so fascinating.
Now let's return to the body itself. Because after several weeks of extreme calorie restriction, the damage becomes harder to ignore. Nutrient deficiencies begin accumulating. Iron levels may fall. Vitamin deficiencies become more likely. The immune system struggles. Hair loss can occur. Muscles ache. Infections become more common. Physical weakness increases. And yet perhaps the most relentless symptom is psychological. Food becomes the center of everything. Every smell matters. Every conversation about eating matters. Every meal becomes significant. It's difficult for people who have never experienced severe hunger to understand just how powerful this mental transformation can be. At this stage, the question is no longer whether the body can survive. The question becomes how much damage survival is causing. And if severe restriction continues for months, the consequences can become permanent. Bone density may decrease. Children can experience impaired growth and development. Cognitive performance may suffer. Mental health problems can worsen. Research has even shown changes in brain structure during prolonged malnutrition. Yes, the brain itself can be affected. Which raises another important point. Not everyone responds the same way. A person with greater fat reserves may survive longer than someone with very little stored energy, but that does not mean they are protected. Environmental conditions matter. Illness matters. Stress matters. Physical activity matters. Age matters. Countless variables influence how long a person can endure severe food deprivation. Some individuals deteriorate rapidly. Others survive surprisingly long periods under difficult conditions, but nobody escapes without consequences.
And there is another side to this story that deserves attention. Not all severe food restriction comes from a lack of available food. Sometimes the battle begins inside the mind. Eating disorders are among the most serious mental health conditions in the world. Anorexia nervosa involves an intense fear of weight gain, even when someone is dangerously undernourished. Bulimia nervosa often involves cycles of binge eating, followed by behaviors intended to compensate, such as self-induced vomiting. Binge eating disorder involves recurrent episodes of consuming large amounts of food, frequently linked to emotional distress. These conditions are not trends. They are not signs of weakness. They are complex illnesses that affect both physical and mental health. And because modern culture often confuses healthy eating with simply eating less, these disorders can sometimes remain hidden for long periods. Which brings us to a reality that extends far beyond individual choices. For hundreds of millions of people around the world, the question isn't how to lose weight, it's how to find enough food for tomorrow. Food insecurity affects communities across continents. Conflict, economic instability, natural disasters, drought, displacement, poverty, all contribute to situations where reliable access to food becomes uncertain. For many families, hunger isn't an occasional inconvenience, it's a daily source of fear. Not knowing where the next meal will come from creates stress that affects every aspect of life. And while the body may adapt for a time, adaptation has limits. Eventually, the costs accumulate. The body weakens, the mind suffers. Hope becomes harder to maintain. That's why the science of starvation is about much more than calories. It's about understanding the extraordinary lengths the human body will go to in order to stay alive. Because yes, the body can survive on shockingly little food for a period of time. It can lower energy expenditure, burn stored fat, break down muscle, slow itself down, stretch resources further than most people would imagine. But every day spent at the edge of survival leaves a mark. And that's the difference between surviving and living. The next time you sit down for a meal, remember that while some people count calories for fitness goals, others count them simply to make it through another day. Food is biology, but making sure people have enough to eat is something much bigger. It's one of the most human things we can do, and perhaps the most important lesson hidden inside this entire story. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe to The Mystery of Science and join us for more incredible journeys into the hidden science shaping our world. Because sometimes the most extraordinary mysteries aren't out in space, they're happening inside your body right now.